These men are the greatest liars and deceivers and manipulators in the history of the world, and while they profess benevolence, they are creators of the greatest malevolence that the world has ever known. Now remember this story, and remember the significance of the penis. For when Jim Garrison arrested Clay Shaw and they searched his home, this is what they found.
There were marble statues of penises on his dresser.
Folks, I want your journey here to be one of self-discovery, so I'm going to show you two examples of how the film has been manipulated. Look above William Greer's left shoulder. He's the driver. You'll see where the emulsion's been scraped off the film all the way up into the grass. You can see where we've drawn a red line to show you this. They're either hiding what really happened, or they scraped the emulsion off to make it look like something happened that maybe did not. The same on the top of Roy Kellerman's head, the passenger in the driver's seat. It appears that he has a bright reflection on top of his head. Dark black hair with a reflection brighter than the chrome on the windshield. Well, we've drawn a line when we put this on the computer to show you the real contour of Roy Kellerman's head. Again, the emulsion has been...
Friends, family, countrymen, lend me your ears. This is Tim with another episode of my podcast on America the Battlefield. You can find us on Rumble and YouTube. Speaking of which, YouTube censored one of my recent podcasts on the Protocols of Zion. Many of you who are familiar with that book and the context of how it exposes the methods of conquest of the Illuminati won't be surprised by that at all. I'll read you what they sent me regarding why they censored that and took it down. This was YouTube's message to me. Here's what we found. The Protocols of Zion. Hate speech. This content incites hatred against individuals or groups based on their protected group status and isn't allowed on YouTube. This may include dehumanization, using slurs, blah, blah. They go on and on. So what really caught my attention is hatred against individuals or groups based on their protected status, protected group status. How do the people who wrote the Protocols of Zion have a protected group status? And what does that actually look like? I think I know why. Here's the second part of their message. When I clicked further, content that incites hatred against individuals or groups based on their protected group status isn't allowed on YouTube. This may include dehumanization, using slurs and stereotypes, inferiority complaints, and/or conspiracy theories. We review educational, documentary, artistic, scientific content on a case-by-case basis. Limited exceptions are made for content with sufficient and appropriate context. So, whoever wrote the Protocols of Zion, which they obviously don't want people to read because it exposes their methods, was granted protected group status. That's really, really interesting to me. And we all know who we're not allowed to criticize. There's an old saying, how do you know who rules over you? Find out who you're not allowed to criticize. Very interesting. Okay, so many of you have seen the first part in this series of my podcast, The Real JFK Files Beyond Redacted. That was part one. This is part two. I'll be adding a lot more contextual information because I realized doing that first podcast, I had so much information to share that there's no way I could cover it in one, two, three, maybe even four parts. So this is part two. In the intro of this podcast, I played a clip from William Cooper's 1993 documentary entitled Kennedy, the Sacrificed King. In that video, he went to Dealey Plaza, which those of you who saw my first podcast on this series know that Dealey Plaza was an outdoor Masonic Temple of the Sun dedicated to George Bannerman Dealey. He was the first Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Dallas, Texas. Dealey Plaza is located exactly on the 33rd parallel in Dallas, Texas, which is the prime meridian. The number 33 is exceptionally important to the Masons. So I'll be going a little more in depth into that documentary at a later date. I have a few notes here. In the first part of my podcast series on this subject, we showed how the White House released and the redacted JFK files via the U.S. National Archives website. We showed how Israeli intelligence and the Mossad were inextricably linked to the cover-up of the truth about JFK's assassination and who really did it. The CIA requested that any mention of Israeli intelligence involvement be redacted from the files and kept out of the scrutiny of the Warren Commission. Incidentally, Judge Earl Warren was a 33rd degree Freemason of the Scottish Rite. That's going to be very important later on, and I'll show you why. The newly released JFK files confirm a secret intelligence pipeline between the CIA, Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, and was personally overseen by CIA counterintelligence chief James Jesus Angelton. I would like to add something. I'm going to show this post by Clandestine on X. Let's see if I can get out of the way here. This came out, I believe, yesterday or the day before. The JFK files are less about JFK's assassination and more so an accumulation of evidence that the CIA are not carrying out their primary mission of intelligence gathering, and instead are focused on regime change throughout the globe. JFK found out about it, and they didn't like that at all. JFK uncovered that the CIA were not serving the American people and were only serving their own personal interests, which was mostly global domination via espionage and covert operations. JFK found out that the CIA were essentially trying to take over the world, and he tried to stop them. Here's one of the files that were released on the U.S. National Archives website. Let's see if we can make this a little bigger. There we go. President Kennedy joined the board meeting, and when the discussion turned to a recommendation of the prior board, the president referred to a recommendation that covert action programs of the CIA may not have been worth the risk, nor worth the great expenditure of manpower and money. That CIA concentration on such activities had tended to detract substantially from the execution of its primary intelligence gathering mission, and that there should be a total reassessment of U.S. covert action policies and programs. The president indicated that, except for Laos and Cuba, he did not have extensive knowledge of other covert operations being conducted by the CIA, he said. Before I go further, I'd like to point out that my blog is back up and running. Many of you were former readers of mine. When I wrote this years and years ago, I think my last post was in 2018. I had to put this on the shelf to go through some domestic changes and challenges in my life. And now we're back up and running. So I'm keeping this up to date. This is my podcast on income tax and requiring voluntary compliance. I'm putting my tire side chats up there. So yeah, I'm keeping this up to date. There's the Protocols of Zion that was censored by YouTube. Actually, I did mean to tell you that I appealed their decision, and they put my YouTube video on this back up. I'm not sure how long it's going to be back up until someone else complains, I guess, because it just exposes a little bit too much. But yeah, I'll put a link to my blog in the description, and everything will pretty much funnel through here. You'll be able to reach my social media, Rumble, YouTube, and Facebook from there. In part 1 of the real JFK files, Beyond Redacted, I showed on the keyboards how Q made a statement years ago. Oh, when was this posted? March 10th, 2018. That we are saving Israel for last. Very specific reason not mentioned a single time. Q. And I'd like to play this in its entirety from Scotty Martin on X. It's entitled The Declaration of Independence. It's a 14-minute video, and I think it's important enough to share the entire thing. So without further ado, let's watch it together.
So this is the Declaration of Independence. Wow. And they ask that this be done. It's never been up. It's been in the vaults for many, many decades. And they said, we have to do something like drapes or something because the light eventually affects it. And it's very cool.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that great? Just went up yesterday.
Wow.
Think Joe Biden would do this? I don't think so. Do you think he'd think of it? Do you think he knows what it is?
In the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new gods for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish their right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative power, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amounts and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burned our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the work of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of a right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
A lot was covered in that video by Scotty Martin. We're going to go over a lot of that in detail. I hope you get something out of this podcast series, because this takes a lot of time and research, digging deep. So that video exposed Arthur Schlesinger's full 15-page memo calling for JFK to break up the CIA in 1961. It showed Truman's fears about the CIA being used not for its intended purpose. It exposed Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, and their child trafficking networks. It explained kind of how the CIA was founded in September 18th of 1947. And then the political state of Israel was founded 8 months later on May 14th, 1948, via the Balfour Declaration. We're going to go over that in the next part of this series and a lot more. And we're going to follow the money trail of who benefited, who stood to gain from the death of John F. Kennedy.
About saving money. Everything I'm wearing, I've had since boot camp.
That wasn't supposed to happen. You'll come to know this podcast is fast and loose, rough, it's raw, but it's real. You get what you get. So stay tuned, bear with me, and you're going to learn a lot. Thank you. See you on the next one.